They forced the fat girl to work in Mountain Man's barn as punishment, but he made her his princess. They made her kneel to learn her place. At high noon in Millbrook, heat shimmered over split-rail fences while the town council gathered like vultures on a fence post. Rosalie Thompson, 21, soft-cheeked, brown curls frizzing in the sun, kept her head bowed as the mayor's verdict cut the air. She was guilty, they said, of stealing bread and potatoes from the town storehouse, not for herself, but for a penniless family sleeping in a wagon on the edge of the creek. Mercy, Millbrook decided, was a crime. 3 months' labor, Mayor Aldrich intoned, voice smooth as a gavel. Up on Bear Mountain, in Caleb Stone's barn. The square crackled with approval. Prudence Whitfield's lace gloves clapped once, dainty and deadly. Let the girl who feeds strays learn what real work tastes like, she purred. Rosalie lifted her eyes, just once, searching the crowd for her parents. Her father stared at his boots. Her mother dabbed her eyes and looked away. The shame stung worse than the sentence. They bundled her onto a rickety wagon at dawn, a trunk shoved at her feet, the driver muttering tales of the beast on the mountain. Caleb Stone, the stories went, was taller than a door, stronger than a grizzly, mean as a January wind. Men who'd met him spoke of a ruined face and a temper to match. No one lasts long up there, the driver whispered, flicking the reins. Say your prayers, girl. Hours later, dust-throated and shaking, Rosalie climbed the last steep pitch alone. The trees thinned, a clearing opened, and there, where she'd braced for filth and fury, stood a sturdy house of hand-scribed logs, a swept yard, neat garden rows, a bright tin pump, a pair of barns squared to the wind like soldiers at attention. A shadow stepped from the open barn door. He was enormous, yes, broad-shouldered, sun-browned, with green eyes that startled against the dark of his beard. But the first thing Rosalie felt was not fear. It was the shock of being seen. "You're the one they sent," he said, voice roughened by weather, not malice. "To work my stalls," Rosalie swallowed. "Yes, sir." His jaw tightened, not at her, but at the town that sent her. "No," he said quietly, "not my stalls." On Bear Mountain, they promised a monster. What Rosalie found at the threshold was a man who looked angry at the world on her behalf. The air inside Caleb Stone's house smelled of pine sap and bread. Rosalie stepped across the threshold hesitantly, half expecting chains, half expecting scorn. But instead, there was warmth. A steady fire burned in the stone hearth. The wooden floors gleamed. Tools were hung in perfect order on the wall. Every inch of the room spoke not of savagery, but of care. Caleb dropped the heavy bucket he'd been carrying and crossed his arms. "They sent you here to shovel stalls?" he asked again, his tone low and disbelieving. Rosalie nodded, twisting her fingers together. "Yes, sir. I was told I'd be here 3 months. I'll do whatever work needs done." He stared at her for a long moment, then turned away with a sharp exhale. "Work needs doing, sure, but not like that." She followed him into the kitchen, where he poured her a glass of water from the pump and slid it across the table. "Drink," he said. "You look like you haven't had any since morning." Rosalie obeyed, her throat dry from the long climb. She couldn't stop glancing at him, this so-called beast. He was massive, yes, but not crude. His hands were scarred, his hair tied loosely at the nape, his shirt sleeves rolled to his elbows. When he moved, it was with a quiet precision, like a man used to fixing what others broke. "Why would the council send a girl up here?" Caleb muttered. "You weigh less than a hay bale and they expect you to haul manure?" Rosalie flushed, shame prickling her skin. "They said I had to learn my lesson." His gaze softened immediately. "And what lesson was that?" "That kindness can be punished," she whispered. Caleb's jaw worked, muscles tight with anger he didn't want her to see. He took a slow breath. You won't be punished here, not for kindness." When she looked up, her eyes were wet. "Then what do you want me to do?" "Rest," he said simply. "There's a room down the hall. You'll find quilts on the bed and bread on the table. Tomorrow you can help me in the garden if you want. But no barns. Not while I've got hands to do the lifting." Rosalie hesitated. You'd let me stay in your house?" "I wouldn't leave anyone out in the dark," he replied. "Not even someone the town calls guilty." That night, Rosalie lay awake beneath the thick quilt, listening to the mountain wind hum against the window panes. The bed was soft, the air cool, and yet her mind raced. Why was he being kind? What did he want from her? When she crept to the window, she saw him outside by lantern light, repairing a fence plank that didn't even look broken. Each motion was calm, patient, deliberate. She realized then that this was not a man hiding from the world out of rage, but a man who had once been wounded deeply enough to retreat from it. In the morning, Caleb greeted her with 2 mugs of coffee and a plate of eggs. "Eat first," he said. "Work later. You'll need strength for the hill." "I can start in the barn today," she offered quickly, hoping to prove her worth. He gave a low chuckle. "You ever seen a bear let his guest clean the cave?" "No, sir." "Then quit calling me sir," he said. "Name's Caleb." Rosalie smiled for the first time since her punishment began. "Rosalie," she said quietly. "I know," he murmured, looking at her a moment longer than he meant to. "They said your name like a curse. I think it sounds like a prayer." That day marked the beginning of something no one in Millbrook could have imagined, a kind of fragile peace between 2 souls the world had already decided didn't belong anywhere. The first week passed like a strange dream, half work, half wonder. Every dawn, mist rolled down the slopes of Bear Mountain, and Rosalie would wake to the smell of coffee and fresh biscuits. Caleb always rose before the sun, his shadow moving through the fog like something belonging to the mountain itself. At first, Rosalie followed him out of duty, not comfort. She trailed behind as he repaired fences, split logs, and fed the horses. Her skirts caught burrs, her breath came hard, and her palms blistered. She expected him to mock her clumsiness the way townsfolk always did, but Caleb never said a word except, "Take your time," or "That's enough for today." One morning, as they hauled buckets of water from the creek, Rosalie slipped on the slick rocks and fell to her knees. The cold struck her like a slap. She braced herself for laughter, but none came. Instead, Caleb's boots splashed into the water. His hand gripped hers, steady and warm. "You all right?" "I'm fine," she said, cheeks burning. "I'm just not made for this kind of work." His voice softened. "You're made for more than you think." When he helped her up, their eyes met, just for a heartbeat. But something passed between them, fragile and undeniable. The mountain soon became less a place of punishment and more a kind of quiet teacher. Caleb showed her how to read the forest, how to tell the hour by the shadows, where wild herbs grew, how to listen for the storm before it broke. Rosalie, in turn, brought laughter into the house again. She sang softly while cooking, rearranged the shelves, and coaxed warmth into corners long gone cold. At night, when the wind howled through the trees, she would sit by the fire, mending his shirts while Caleb read from an old leather-bound book. His voice, low and rough, filled the cabin like music. One evening, after finishing a story from the Bible, he looked up. "You believe people can change, Rosalie?" She nodded slowly. "If they're given a reason to." Caleb's eyes lingered on her face, on the light of the fire dancing in her hair. "Then maybe I've found mine." A storm came 2 nights later, hard, wild, and relentless. The roof groaned under rain, and thunder rattled the valley. Rosalie woke to the sound of hooves. The barn door had blown open. Without hesitation, she threw on her shawl and ran into the storm. "Rosalie!" Caleb shouted, sprinting after her. Rain soaked them both to the bone. She was struggling to pull the latch shut while the wind whipped her skirt. Caleb grabbed her waist, steadying her, his body shielding hers from the cold. "You shouldn't be out here," he yelled. "I couldn't let the horses get loose." Even in the chaos, he couldn't help but smile. "You're braver than half the men in that town." When they finally slammed the door shut, they stood there for a moment, chest to chest, drenched and breathless. The thunder outside seemed to fade. Only the sound of their hearts filled the dark. Caleb reached up, brushing wet hair from her face. "You could have frozen." Rosalie's voice trembled, not from cold. "It wouldn't have been the first time I was left out in the storm." Something broke inside him then, not pity, but understanding. He cupped her cheek, thumb tracing the curve of her jaw, and said quietly, "Not while I'm here." When morning came, the sky was washed clean in silver. Steam rose from the fields. Caleb stood at the porch, watching the world glisten, and Rosalie stepped beside him with 2 mugs of coffee. "I used to hate the sound of rain," she said. "Why? Because it reminded me of all the nights I cried alone." He took the cup from her hand and set it down gently. "Then we'll make it sound like home instead." And for the first time in years, Rosalie laughed. Not a nervous giggle, but the full, bright sound of someone beginning to heal. By the second month, the cabin no longer felt like a stranger's home. It pulsed with quiet life. Every morning, smoke curled from the chimney before sunrise. The scent of bread and cedar filled the air. Birds nested near the porch, unafraid of the giant who once scared every creature from the woods. Rosalie had changed everything without even meaning to. Caleb had always lived by silence. It was safer that way. No voices to argue, no laughter to remind him what he'd lost. But Rosalie brought sound back. She hummed while stirring soup. She talked to the chickens like they were old friends. She filled the corners with soft fabrics and sunlight. Even the floorboards seemed to creak less, as if the house itself relaxed under her touch. One evening, as the fire crackled low, Caleb sat whittling a piece of pine at the table. Rosalie was sewing by lantern light, her round cheeks glowing warm in the amber hue. She looked peaceful, until the needle pricked her finger. "Ow!" she gasped. Caleb looked up immediately. "You hurt?" "It's nothing," she said quickly, embarrassed. "Just clumsy hands." He crossed the room in 2 long strides, took her hand gently, and examined the tiny red mark. "Clumsy hands," he murmured. "These hands bake, mend, plant, and heal. Don't talk about them like they're useless." Rosalie froze. No one had ever spoken to her like that before. The world had always measured her by what she wasn't, never by what she was. She tried to pull her hand back, but he held it another moment, his calloused thumb brushing lightly over her knuckles. "Thank you," she whispered. Caleb's voice lowered. "You've thanked me every day since you got here. Maybe it's time you let yourself be thanked." Her breath caught. "For what?" "For making this house feel alive again." Days blurred into a rhythm neither of them wanted to end. Rosalie tended the garden, her laughter echoing across the field, while Caleb repaired the barn roof. In the evenings, they shared meals by lamplight, stew thick with vegetables, fresh bread still warm. Caleb always waited for her to eat first. One night, after dinner, he found her standing by the piano, a dust-covered relic from years past. "You play?" he asked. "A little," she admitted shyly. "My mother taught me before she got sick." "Then play," he said. Her fingers hesitated over the keys, then began a slow melody, soft, imperfect, but full of heart. Caleb leaned against the doorway, watching. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like a man built from scars and solitude. He felt like a boy again, listening to the world breathe. When the song ended, Rosalie looked up, startled to see tears in his eyes. "Did I do something wrong?" He shook his head. "No, you reminded me what right feels like." Later that night, as the mountain wind howled, Rosalie couldn't sleep. She found Caleb outside, sitting on the porch with a lantern beside him. The moonlight caught the sharp planes of his face, softening them. "You don't rest much, do you?" she asked. "Not when I'm thinking," he said. "About what?" He hesitated. "About why the good ones always get punished." Rosalie sat beside him. "Maybe because the world doesn't know what to do with kindness." Caleb turned to her then, voice rough. "The world doesn't deserve kindness like yours." She smiled faintly. "Then I guess that's why I found you up here. Someone has to." Something unspoken hung between them. Caleb looked away, his heart hammering louder than the crickets. "You should sleep, Rosalie." "I will," she said softly, rising to go. "But thank you for letting me be more than my punishment." After she disappeared inside, Caleb stayed where he was, staring at the door she'd closed. He realized she had become the rhythm of his days, the warmth of his nights, and for the first time in years, he feared what life would be like without her. Spring slid quietly down the slopes of Bear Mountain, bringing green to the valley and a kind of fragile peace to the cabin. Rosalie had never known such stillness. The air itself felt different here, clean, forgiving, untouched by judgment. Yet beneath the calm, she sensed something unspoken in Caleb, a shadow behind his steady eyes. He carried his kindness like a shield, always gentle, always composed. But sometimes, when she caught him gazing toward the ridge at dusk, his jaw would tighten as if he were listening for ghosts. One afternoon, while cleaning the loft, Rosalie found a wooden chest tucked beneath an old quilt. She hesitated, curiosity battling respect, but when the lid creaked open, her breath caught. Inside were yellowed letters, military papers, and a photograph of a young man in uniform, smiling beside a slender woman with bright eyes. The caption on the back read, "Caleb Stone and Clara, 1878. Rosalie froze. The resemblance was unmistakable. The man in the photo had Caleb's sharp jaw and steady gaze, only younger, unburdened. When Caleb came in from the field that evening, mud streaking his boots, she was waiting by the fire, the photo clutched to her chest. "Who is she?" Rosalie asked gently. Caleb stopped short, his expression closing like a door. "Where did you find that?" "In the loft. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to pry." He took the picture from her hand, eyes softening with pain. "She was my wife." Rosalie's heart dropped. "Was?" "She died 8 years ago," he said quietly. "The fever took her. The town said it was God's will, but I knew better. It was neglect. The doctor wouldn't come because we couldn't pay. After that, I left Millbrook and never looked back." Rosalie swallowed hard. "I'm so sorry, Caleb." He looked into the fire, voice cracking. "I built this place for her, Rosalie. Every log, every nail. Then when she was gone, I built walls around myself too, higher than this mountain." There was nothing she could say, so she reached out, her fingers resting lightly on his arm. "You don't have to stay behind those walls anymore." He turned, meeting her gaze with something fierce and raw. "I told myself I'd never care again. But you—" He stopped, swallowing hard. "You make that promise feel like a lie." Rosalie's chest tightened. "And does that frighten you?" He nodded once. "More than anything." Days later, the peace shattered. A group of riders appeared on the mountain trail, 3 men from Millbrook, sent by Mayor Aldrich to check on the girl's punishment. Rosalie saw them first from the window, their horses kicking up dust. Caleb stepped outside before they reached the porch. "State your business," he said flatly. "We came to make sure the girl's alive," sneered Deacon Rourke, a man whose cruelty was as sharp as his boots were polished. "Word is, you've been keeping her awful comfortable up here." Rosalie appeared in the doorway. "I'm fine," she said, voice steady. "You can tell them I'm alive and free." Rourke smirked. "Free? You're still under sentence. Town council says you belong to Millbrook until they say otherwise." Caleb's eyes went dark. "She belongs to no one." "You planning to keep her?" Rourke asked, a grin twisting his mouth. "Guess every monster needs his pet." The crack of Caleb's fist hitting Rourke's jaw echoed through the clearing. The man crumpled to the dirt, groaning. The others reached for their rifles, but Caleb's voice, deep and thunderous, stopped them cold. "You ride back to Millbrook," he growled, "and tell them this mountain answers to no council. Rosalie Thompson is under my protection. If any man comes here again with bad intent, he won't ride home." The men left, muttering, too shaken to look back. When the dust settled, Rosalie stood frozen. Caleb's hands trembled slightly, though his voice was calm. "I didn't mean for you to see that," he said. She stepped closer. "You were defending me." He met her eyes. "I'd do it again." That night, Rosalie sat beside him on the porch as the sun bled behind the trees. "They won't stop," she whispered. "I know. Then what will we do?" Caleb turned to her, his voice soft but steady. "We'll live, we'll plant, we'll build, we'll fight if we must, but we won't hide anymore." She smiled faintly. "Together?" He nodded. "Always together." And for the first time, the shadow in his eyes lifted, not gone, but lighter, touched by something like hope. Summer burned gold across Bear Mountain, but beneath its beauty came the weight of something approaching. Rumors, whispers, threats carried on the wind. Caleb knew men like Aldrich and Rourke wouldn't swallow humiliation easily. They'd return, not for justice, but for vengeance and pride. He began reinforcing the fences, sharpening tools, stacking wood by the door. When Rosalie caught him doing it one morning, she placed her hand over his. "You think they'll really come back?" "I know they will," he said simply. "Men like that can't stand being made fools of by a woman, and by someone they call a monster." Rosalie's voice trembled. "Then let me help." Caleb shook his head. "You've done enough." She met his gaze, eyes bright and fierce. "No, I've spent my whole life letting others fight for me. This time I stand with you." He wanted to argue, but something in her face stopped him. The timid girl from Millbrook was gone. Before him stood a woman who had learned her worth on the mountain. 3 days later, the storm broke, not from the sky, but from the valley. At dawn, the sound of horses shattered the calm. 6 riders climbed the ridge, rifles slung across their saddles. In the lead rode Mayor Aldrich, his gray coat snapping in the wind, and beside him Prudence Whitfield, her lips tight with spite. Caleb stepped out of the cabin, rifle resting across his arm. "You've come far enough," he said evenly. Aldrich dismounted, puffing with false authority. "By order of Millbrook, we're here to reclaim town property. That woman," he pointed toward Rosalie, who had appeared in the doorway, "is still under sentence." "She's served more than her time," Caleb replied. "You want to drag her back for pride, not punishment." Prudence's voice cut through the air like ice. "That girl shamed this town, and now she lives in sin with you? A wild animal in the woods?" Rosalie stepped forward, her chin lifting. "No, Mrs. Whitfield. I live with a man who showed me more decency than any of you ever did." Laughter rippled through the men, cruel and sharp. "You hear that, Aldrich?" one sneered. "The fat thief's found her night." Caleb's eyes flashed. "Say another word like that," he said softly, "and you'll choke on it." Aldrich raised a hand. "We don't want blood, Sullivan. Just the girl. Send her down, and you can go back to your mountain tricks." Rosalie moved before Caleb could stop her. She walked down the porch steps and stood in the dirt between them all. The breeze tugged at her hair, but her voice was steady. "You think this is about me," she said, "but it's about what you can't stand. That kindness lives where cruelty failed. You punished me for helping the hungry. You called me a thief for feeding children. But up here, I learned something none of you ever will. Mercy isn't weakness." Aldrich's face turned red. "Enough." "No," Caleb said quietly, stepping beside her. "She's finally being heard." Rourke's rifle jerked upward, the muzzle flashing toward Caleb. In an instant, Rosalie threw herself against him. The shot rang out, echoing off the mountainside. Birds burst from the trees. When the smoke cleared, Rourke was on the ground, his gun knocked from his grasp. Caleb's voice was low, dangerous. "Next man who lifts a weapon here doesn't leave this ridge breathing." Aldrich's hands shook. "You'll regret this, Sullivan." "I already regret trusting that town with a soul like hers," Caleb said. "Now go." They left, broken, silent, their authority bleeding out with their pride. When the last hoofbeat faded, Caleb turned to Rosalie. Her hands were trembling, her eyes full of unshed tears. "You could have been killed," he said hoarsely. She smiled weakly. "So could you." He stared at her, the fear and love warring inside him finally breaking free. "Don't ever do that again," he whispered. "You hear me?" Rosalie stepped closer, her voice soft but sure. "Then stop thinking I'm something fragile to protect. We're equals, Caleb. You saved me once, but today we saved each other." He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Equals," he repeated, "and more than that." When he pulled her into his arms, the world around them fell quiet. No guns, no shouts, no judgment. Just two souls, scarred but standing, on a mountain that had witnessed their defiance and their love. Autumn came quietly to Bear Mountain. The leaves turned gold, and the air carried the soft scent of pine and hearth smoke. For the first time in years, the mountain felt safe, not just for Caleb, but for the woman who had transformed it from a fortress into a home. Rosalie moved through the cabin with a kind of calm joy. The fear that had once lived behind her eyes was gone. Each morning, she opened the shutters to let sunlight spill across the wooden floors. Each night, she lit the lamps and read aloud to Caleb while he carved wood by the fire. Their days were simple but full, woven together like threads in a quilt of quiet love. One crisp evening, Caleb returned from the ridge with a bundle of apples. He found Rosalie humming by the stove, baking something that filled the cabin with a sweetness even he couldn't name. He smiled faintly. "You've made this place smell like heaven." Rosalie turned, a playful look in her eyes. "Heaven smells like hard work and pie, apparently." He set down the basket. "You've done more here in months than I did in years." "I didn't build walls, Caleb," she said softly. "I opened windows." He looked at her for a long moment, realizing how right she was. She hadn't just changed his house, she had changed him. For so long, Caleb had believed solitude was safety. But now, with Rosalie beside him, he saw that solitude was only another kind of cage. She had walked into his exile, unafraid, and taught him how to live again. Later that night, they sat on the porch, wrapped in a single blanket, the stars burning bright above the valley. The silence between them was easy now, no longer heavy with unspoken things. "Do you ever miss them?" Rosalie asked quietly. "The town, the people." Caleb exhaled slowly. "I miss what I thought they could be, but not what they became." She nodded. "Sometimes I think about those children I fed. I hope they're all right." "They will be," he said, "because someone saw them when no one else did. That kind of kindness doesn't disappear. It ripples outward." Rosalie smiled, leaning her head on his shoulder. "Do you think anyone will ever understand what really happened up here?" He brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. "Maybe not, but that's all right. Let them tell their stories. We'll keep living ours." When winter came again, it was softer than before. Snow blanketed the cabin roof, but the fire never went out. The mountain, once a symbol of isolation, had become their sanctuary. One morning, as the first light touched the snow, Caleb found Rosalie standing by the window, hands resting gently on her stomach. He understood instantly. "Rosalie," he whispered. She turned, tears glimmering in her eyes. "We're going to have a child." He crossed the room in a heartbeat, pulling her close, his rough hands trembling. "You've given me everything I thought I'd lost." "No," she murmured. "We gave it to each other." Outside, the wind sang through the pines, carrying with it a peace that neither had known before. The world below might still whisper, might still judge, but up here, on Bear Mountain, love had rewritten their fate. That night, as the fire glowed low, Caleb wrapped an arm around her and whispered, "You're safe here, always." Rosalie smiled, eyes closing against his chest. "It's our home now, Caleb, if you'll have me forever." He kissed her hair, voice barely above a breath. "Forever's not long enough." And with that, the mountain fell into silence, gentle, eternal, alive with the warmth of two hearts that had found each other in the unlikeliest of places. Every time I write a story like this, I think about how easily the world forgets gentleness, how quickly we learn to measure people by what they look like, instead of who they are. Rosalie was never meant to be a heroine in her town's story. She was mocked, punished, and sent away to be broken. But kindness, her stubborn, quiet kindness, became the fire that changed everything. And Caleb, the so-called monster of Bear Mountain, showed that real strength isn't in fists or fury. It's in protecting what the world tries to destroy. It's in seeing someone's worth when no one else will. Maybe that's why stories like theirs linger, because they remind us of what we all crave deep down: to be seen, to be chosen, and to be loved without condition. If you're listening to this somewhere far from home, maybe in a city that's too loud or a room that feels too empty, remember, even the harshest places can hold miracles. And sometimes, love finds us not when we're beautiful or brave, but when we're broken and think we have nothing left to give. So tell me, where in the world are you hearing this story from tonight? And do you still believe, like Rosalie did, that kindness can save even the loneliest heart? Because if you do, don't go anywhere. The next story is already waiting for you.